Hey there, welcome to School of Emo, the podcast where we dive into the world of emo, pop punk, and everything in between. If you've ever found yourself in your car screaming the lyrics to Taking Back Sunday, wearing way too much eyeliner in the early 2000s, adding a buckle or a chain to every outfit you've put on, you are in the right place. I'm Erin Judge, and each week I will be your fellow student, guiding you through the music, the culture, and the history that shaped an entire generation of angsty teens. I am not the teacher of this school. I am a fellow student, here to learn alongside you and from you. Together, we will cover a lot of information that doesn't really matter, but will remind us of the days of stalking Myspace channels and getting lost in chat rooms. So connect your dial-up, turn on your webcam, and let's go to School of Emo. Welcome back to the School of Emo. We are going to talk about a band that has defined, especially those who grew up in the youth group, kind of Christian, emo, metal, whatever we want to call it, space. And that is the Devil Wears Prada. I'm so excited to talk about them because they're a band that I was really familiar with some of their songs. They're definitely a lot harder, I guess, or more maybe towards metal, screamo, than what I typically would be drawn to. But I learned a lot through the prep of this episode, and I've really enjoyed listening to them and even understanding the lyrics, which you don't always hear, but being able to read through them and understand them. I've gained a lot from the prep of this. And as some of you know, if you've been around the last few episodes, we are prepping for the Emo's Not Dead cruise in January, and the Devil Wears Prada is going to be there. And this will be my first time ever seeing them live that I know of. I did grow up in the youth group space of the 2000s where I would go to concerts because they were labeled quote unquote Christian. So my mom would take me and I would get to go, missed out on Warped Tour, but at least I got to see bands like Under Oath and things like that. So maybe they slipped in there at some point, but I don't remember. And so this will be my first time cognitively aware of seeing them live, and I'm excited about it. So let's go to where the band began. And we are going to be back in the Midwest in Dayton, Ohio in 2005. So that sweet spot of emo, right? And in Ohio, there was an original lineup group of teens: Mike Ronica on unclean vocals, Jeremy DePoister on clean vocals and guitar, Chris Ruby on lead guitar, Andy Trick on bass, Daniel Williams on drums, and James Bainey on keys and synths. And this is something that's kind of going to set this group apart, but that is the incorporation of synth, which was peak Myspace metalcore. So if you go back to those mid 2000s and especially the early 2000s, metalcore began to blend and incorporate synth into the sound. And bands like Under Oath were incorporating them for more of that atmospheric and symphonic sound. This also became more prominent and defined with the use of electronicore in the late 2000s, which was a fusion of metalcore and electronic music, popularized by bands like Attack Attack, Enter Shikari. And so this was not necessarily abnormal, but they were one of the bands that were kind of going into this subgenre. And we've talked about this with the origins of emo, right? We're getting into some of the bands that are kind of like a weird umbrella. Even my Spotify Wrapped, right? I get mad every year at Spotify Wrapped because it tells me it says I listen to 109 genres. And if you break down the genres, it's like screamo, pop punk, art pop, punk rock, all these different names that they're trying to put in there. Alternative. And what is emo? What is not emo? Is emo the umbrella? Is emo a subgenre? I think those second wave emo fans may say emo is its own thing and it's clearly defined. But if we look at the third wave and just music as a whole, everything just kind of broke open because bands were able to experiment with different sounds. They had a lot of great influences of creativity for their sound. And then with MySpace, streaming, all of that stuff with the internet and TV, all of that, we had more access to different styles of music, and bands really could become successful without fitting into this perfect mold. And so it makes sense that this kind of post-punk to metal metalcore, the emo core space would start to play around and experiment with different sounds, which we see with kind of the softer emo, maybe that Midwest emo, screamo, but also what we now see with the synth-based metalcore at the time, which is where Devil Wears Prada was perfectly placed. So, where did the name come from? Because they do have such an iconic, interesting name, but it's also the name of a TV, like a movie, right? A very popular, iconic movie. And so, with their name, they chose it based on the novel, The Devil Wears Prada, which is what the movie is based off of. If you're not familiar, there is a book that came first that then influenced the movie with Meryl Streep and Anne Hathaway. Now we have Devil Wears Prada 2 coming out, right? So it's very relevant at this point in time. And the band, like some of the members, did not read the book, which is obvious, but they believed that it had more of an anti-materialistic message. And so they wanted to take on that anti-materialistic message in their band name. And that's why they chose The Devil Wears Prada. Once they read the book, they realized that it did have a different meaning than they actually thought it would. And that the whole book was about kind of the opposite of that. But they decided to keep the name anyways. And what's so interesting, because this was my first question as I was looking this up, because I was curious about this whole time, anyways, right? Of like, well, how did they get this name? Did they come first at the movie? You know, what else was going on? And they did come first, but their first like release, so they were formed before the movie was released, but when they released their album, the movie was like right behind that. So really around the same time. And it's such a big movie that my first thought was, what about trademarks? Was there any legal issues? Right. Because a lot of bands were dealing with that around this time from labels. Like it just seemed like the perfect time where everyone was getting into legal issues. And so it would make sense that they would. And the band members have stated over time that they were surprised that they never faced a lawsuit because the film was released shortly after they signed their record deal. And even though there was potential for a lawsuit, nothing was filed. To this day, the band continues to form under the name. And who knows what we'll see with the next movie, Devil Wears Prada 2. Maybe it's because movie and music are so different. Maybe it's because they're in completely different spaces. The Devil Wears Prada is big in our world, but not necessarily as big in the rest of the world. And so if there's not really true competition, does that matter? I think the band has a great opportunity to put out some really killer merch and push it towards the Devil Wears Prada 2 rise, because everyone right now is obsessed with that. But I guess if you're going for an anti-consumerism message, you may not do that. Depends on how you want to make money. But anyways, Mike Ronica, in an interview looking back at that time, quoted saying, "We weren't trying to make a fashion statement. It was supposed to mean that possessions don't matter." But either way, it's iconic, it's memorable. And because of that tie to the movie and everything else, it does make you curious, which I think is really important. So we're going back to 2006. The band signed to Rise Records and released their first album, Dear Love, A Beautiful Discord. It was raw, it was chaotic, it had a lot of breakdowns, the synths, and then had what they are still known for, spiritually charged lyrics and really vulnerable, well thought out lyrics behind the screaming. Songs like Dogs Can Grow Beards All Over and Swords, Dragons, and Diet Coke quickly became fan favorites. And some of that was due to their kind of ridiculous song titles. So we talked about that with Fall Out Boy, right? They went for these, there was this era of this kind of mid early 2000s where bands would have these crazy long like song titles that had nothing to do with the songs that they wrote. And in a way, almost like the Blink 182 world, right? It's almost like a disguise in this space because the song titles are really dumb, but the songs are much deeper. So let's talk about that a little bit with Dogs Can Grow Beards All Over and those lyrics. Welcome to the war, a martyr's challenge, chainsaw brutality, tornado strength, king of the diamond, king of the grave, Lawlessness stains black on whitewashed tombs. We're too strong to compromise. Don't be ashamed of your faith. Dear Lord, deliver me from hypocrisy and Circe's, the scarlet desire. He wears a slick jacket and gold watch. Her dishonesty has scarred hands. He wears a slick jacket and leather jacket. So some fans believe that the nonsensical song titles were used to mask the deeply personal lyrics. Others think that the band was just bored and very much online, right? We call that chronically online now. And so they were doing what was popular, especially in the Myspace world. Both are plausible. The band has kind of continued it. They've kind of strayed, as we'll get into, but the lyrics have not necessarily changed. And it was not uncommon for, I mean, these guys were not that old, right? And so, of course, they would mask that and not talk about some of these things as like straightforward. And so masking it with a different song title could make a lot of sense. And as someone who did grow up in like the church world, around this time, there was a lot of shame, which I think is why there was such a rise of this kind of Christian emo subgenre, this metal emo Christian world. It was so big at that time. And I think it was because a lot of us as like millennials and like we were kids, we were teens at the time, we grew up under a group of people who I think were raised on a lot of shame and a lot of like stuffing down emotion, right? I think that's why emo became what it was in the third wave. But in the Christian space, there was, I think, a lot of shame put around even wanting to discuss those difficult thoughts and feelings. It was like, oh, you need to cover it up really quickly. And they kind of didn't fit within that Christian world. And so I could see where there might be some masking due as a way of protection in that space as well. Again, the band hasn't said this, so who knows? But I could see where that could possibly be, a reason behind it. So a year later, we have 2007, and the next album, Plagues, which was the album that launched the band into the stratosphere of the metalcore space. This is where they began to be on Warped Tour. They were in Hot Topic. MySpace autoplay tracks were melting laptops, right? Everything was happening. And they were right in this perfect like height of this wave of emo and everything within that umbrella. This era is defined by the synth heavy chaos drop tune chugs. If you're not familiar with that, that's that percussive heavy strumming sound in heavy metal. It's almost like like open strumming or like closed on all the things. And the lyrics leaned heavily into spiritual battles, morality, and personal conviction. So they still had this kind of spirituality infused. Now the band is not super like, they're not saying that they're Christians. They're not defining themselves as Christian, but because their lyrics had such a kind of spiritual depth to it, spiritual backbone, and their location, that's where they kind of got grouped in. And so this is an album that continued to feed off of that. So HTML Rules Dude became an album. If you read that, very much of the online space, like the what was it called? The AIM, whenever we'd be in chat rooms, like how we would write things out. And the very iconic, Hey John, what's your name again? So looking at the lyrics of HTML Rules, Dude, oh, and yet I've been cleansed. And yet I've been cleansed with the water, a purity no mind can grasp, a purity so cool up on my fingertips. The vision that I've seen, this is the action that spawns from the end. For the longest time, I've been watching the world breathe again. What lies here are mountains composed of tombstones. Examine these beautiful faces. Keep singing now. Keep singing now. Examine these beautiful faces. Keep singing now. Examine these beautiful faces of war. Will we push bedlam noise to the state of blissfulness, display her beauty to the people? A purity no mind can grasp. So going back to that Christian metalcore wave and Rise Records is not necessarily a Christian label, but also housed some other Christian metalcore bands. And the Devil Wears Prada, started in this space. So think about like youth group shows. So when we think about the basements, right, of emo in the DIY era of post punk genres, some places allowed for that. The Midwest and South didn't always have that available, but youth groups were a spot, right? That was a way for especially teens to play music to their peers, grow a fan base. And the Devil Wears Prada was part of that. So that's where they really kind of started getting their feet comfortable in playing in front of crowds. Their earlier shows were often small scale, self-booked gigs, not very big, and youth groups were a big part of it, as well as skate parks, which were another kind of venue or way to connect to other people. And again, while the band members were a lot quieter about their faith than others in the scene, like Under Oath at the time, their lyrics did seem to resonate with Christians, and they began to be part of that space. And in this part of that era, they were able to kind of bridge the gap between that Christian metalcore space and the broader kind of emo space, which again was primed and ready, I think, because there was such a big group of this kind of Christian emo sub scene, I guess. Which is so fascinating, even with like the Warped Tour scene, which is where, again, Under Oath was one of the biggest ones that we are familiar with. 2009, a couple of years later, they released With Roots Above and Branches Below. And this is where they took what they had formed with Plagues being like their kind of springboard, and they really cemented themselves as, their identity, who they were, and truly cemented their fan base. So a lot of fans will probably fight over which one is their biggest album, but many would agree that this was a big height for the band. And what's so interesting is that this album was one of the most celebrated metalcore albums of the 2000s. But this 2009 time, a lot of like emo bands were kind of falling off. This is where a lot of bands began to try to be more mainstream. The emo space was changing, like the scene was changing. A lot of bands were not necessarily succeeding. And so for the Devil Wears Prada to hit kind of a high at this time, I think is so fascinating. And maybe it's my ignorance of the metalcore space. Like maybe I don't know what was happening there compared to like more true emo and pop punk, but it's so interesting. Like, again, looking through their history of how they were able to actually rise and continue to see success in this time where a lot of bands were not. So this album brought songs like Danger, Wild Man, Assistant to the Regional Manager, kind of solidifying their identity as heavy, intense, and deeply emotional. The song titles still a little goofy and not quite as like true to every song, but starting to really mature and change with the landscape, but also just with their own growth as a band. And so with Assistant to the Regional Manager, yes, they were referencing The Office, and that definitely helped with their MySpace success and their relevance to what else was going on at the time. So let's look at those lyrics. These writings are to those who have wept. These writings are to those who haven't looked deeply enough into the correct resolution, wrong again, but stronger now. We can face this, fight life with life. All glory to the one in existence. Bring upon your name, your grace, your everything. All glory to the one in existence. Bring upon your name, your grace, your everything. Hold hands and stare into the circle. What are we looking at? Rumors and rumors and rumors. Assembly, disintegration, rumors and rumors and rumors. Perish, 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 perish. Tombstones serve as mirrors and the graves are infinite. Take a look through the lens and through your eyes. End the partitioning. Wrong again, but stronger now. We can face this. Fight life with life. Enemies will go for your throat. So besides that last line, I don't really see a lot of Dwight Schrute references in the lyrics, which is just so interesting. I'm curious why the name came up and what they were thinking, but it's their style, and apparently it definitely worked. A quote from Mike looking back at this time in this album. He said, "This record was us figuring out who we were. It was heavier, it was tighter. It felt like the band we've been trying to become. This is also where their live shows got bigger. The crowd got a bit rowdier, and they became a must see act for those who were in this kind of emo scene and still fighting for the scene and during this kind of transition out of that second wave. Looking back at some of the fan moments around this time, like this era came with a video that circulated on YouTube of a fan doing a backflip during a breakdown and accidentally kicking another fan in the face. And then both kids got up and started moshing. And the band later said that it was one of the most metal things they'd ever seen. So it was kind of an iconic fan moment during this period of time. So now going into the 2010s, we got Zombie EP in 2010, which became one of the most iconic releases in their catalog. And what's really interesting is that it was their first concept album or concept EP. And it was telling a story of surviving a zombie apocalypse. So leaning into the themes of fear, overwhelming anxiety, desperation, absolute brutality, all of that infused into the music, but more in a concept space versus just that kind of introspective storytelling, which was very different. So they leaned into that kind of cinema that was so big around those like kind of moving into the 2010s. And fans still claim it to be one of the best metalcore EPs ever made. Maybe you debate that. Maybe you agree. Let me know. And then in 2011, they released Dead Throne, which is a full album that marked a heavier, darker, more emotionally charged turn for the band, focusing mainly on heartbreak, loss, and disillusionment, which Mike would later say came from a very personal space. And he was quoted in an interview at the time saying, Dead Throne was about purging poison from my life. So not a lot of extra details around that. My first thought was, oh, did they go through like a deconstruction of faith, like a lot of bands did, looking at Under Oath around this time? And apparently he is still considers himself a Christian, so maybe not. But who knows with touring and all the things that they were, going through at that time. There probably was. Maybe there was substance involved, maybe it was just the stress of touring and trying to keep up, like your creativity being your job, all these things that could have happened around that time. Like, who are we? We don't know what exactly was going on. This era also started to shift the band lineup and began to bring on some different changes due to some internal strains of the band members. Not uncommon for those around this time. Any band that is touring that amount of time and creating music together for that period of time. And fans were noticing more of a tonal shift in kind of that turning point in the band's identity and like the legacy they were leaving through their music. So by the mid 2010s, we had a few changes. James Bainey, the keyboardist, left the band. Chris Ruby, the founding guitarist, also later stepped down to focus on family. And that began to alter the band's sound with those like shifts. So in 2013, they released 818. 2016, they released Transit Blues. And in these two albums, they began to experiment with post-hardcore influences, darker atmospheres, more of the melodic structures, complex emotional themes, like really trying to kind of shift their sound, but also experiment a bit within the same space. So not completely leaving their core sound, but changing it a little bit and experimenting with what would be possible and what they would become. And some fans did push back at this at first, but over time, many view it as kind of their grown up era and began to really love that direction that they were going in. And some fans, just as a theory and speculation, some fans believe that Transit Blues is a spiritual sequel to Dead Throne because there are lyrical parallels about the grief, isolation, and healing that was discussed. So kind of an interesting thing. And if you are a fan, maybe you have opinions on this. If you are just learning about the Devil Wears Prada, that's something that you can experiment with is listen to Dead Throne, read through those lyrics, and then go into Transit Blues and see how you think that those may connect. And then in 2019, they dropped The Act, which was a very different album than what they had created before. It was more theatrical, more cinematic, and emotionally raw. And this is where Mike, in his songwriting, was exploring anxiety, depression, and spiritual conflict with a little less filtering, which is so interesting because I wouldn't really call them that filter, but I do think that a lot of the lyrics are definitely more poetic, and there's more like symbolism and kind of comparisons and like just straightforward honesty. And he said in a later quote that the act was the most personal and comfortable record we've ever made. So, looking through some of those lyrics, let's go into Chemical. Waking up to no meaning, I stare at the ceiling, count the imperfections that surround my being. Can tell how I'm feeling, and it hurts more when you ask. There's a hole in my head and heart, but I'm a long way from the start. Back when I couldn't move, was frozen, I told myself it's all good, it's only chemical. I'm too shy to speak up. Guess I have my reasons for telling little lies about those around me and what I could be. It's eating me alive. There's a hole in my head and heart, but I'm a long way from the start. Back when I couldn't move, was frozen, I told myself it's all good, it's only chemical. I want to scream, but it won't help. I've created my own hell, and it's only chemical. I find comfort when they say you can't sit and count the days until it ends. There's still times I want to break everything I've ever made, but I've come a long way from back when I couldn't move, was frozen. I told myself it's all good, it's only chemical. I want to scream, but it won't help. I've created my own hell, and it's only chemical. It's a little bit of a more straightforward honesty, and also a song title that actually matches the lyrics, which is That Continued Evolution. So, leading us into the 2020s, 2021, The Devil Wears Prada gives fans a little bit of a gift with the Z2 EP, which is the sequel to Zombie. And somehow they made it even heavier than Zombie gave us. So, this leans more into the themes of psychological horror. So, isolation, helplessness, the slow unraveling of the mind, which is fascinating. And many fans interpret it as a metaphor for the pandemic era because this was right after COVID, right? And so written during that period of time, which a lot of these themes were the actual experiences of a lot of people. And then in 2022, they released Color Decay, which is an album that was regarded as one of their best works ever. So again, continuing to not just stay relevant with their fans, but continue to produce albums that fans were actually enjoying and became obsessed with, but also were able to garner new fans. Which again, not a lot of bands have been able to do that. So even though they may not be like the top band ever, maybe in your world they are, and I love that, but they are still creating music that resonates with new people and their current fan groups. And that is very, very special and kind of rare. So this record hit a bit different for fans. This is where they were tackling burnout, fear, addiction, hopelessness, healing. Tracks like Salt, Time, and Broken all resonated with fans of many different ages and in different life stages. And at this point, The Devil Wears Prada stands out as one of the rare metalcore bands that not only survived the early 2000s scene, but really evolved beyond it. So looking at Sacrifice lyrics in this album, I felt it under my skin, watch the walls close in, your words drawn like a blade, contaminate my veins, unforgiven. You bent the truth so you could play the victim. What's real fades. I swear I'm not paranoid. I let it in as if I had a choice. Just bury me in red. I don't want another fight. Push me off the edge. And I can be your sacrifice. Rope severed this cycle, all consumed by the numbered symptoms that you create. There's no shelter beneath the rain. Shut me out, shut me out. Sick of the misdirection. You cut me down as what's real fades. I swear I'm not paranoid. I let it in as if I had a choice. Just bury me in red. I don't want another fight. Push me off the edge, and I can be your sacrifice. We let the knot go. We let it unwind. You dug in deeper with that same knife. Twist the handle side to side. We let the knot go. You let it die. I swear I'm not paranoid. I let it in as if I had a choice. Just bury me in red. I don't want another fight. Push me off the edge, and I can be your sacrifice. So then in 2025, where we are today, the band has released their newest album, Flowers. Now, this is a little different. This is a little bit more melodic, a little bit more atmospheric. So, again, not such a big shift, but leaning into kind of a different layer of their identity and who they have been throughout time. And fans have been a bit mixed by this. Some enjoy the new kind of more melodic sound. It is a little bit more, it's kind of that shift we saw with a lot of bands in the late 2010s, where they were going more towards mainstream, what would be palatable, more popular. This is kind of the Devil Wears Prada, maybe shift towards that, or maybe experimentation. Like we don't have enough time to know what follows will kind of define that. But other fans have criticized the lyrics and production as more generic and as a departure from their core identity. So those who appreciate the evolution note the emotional depth of this in songwriting, viewing it as a natural progression for the band. But those who dislike it express concerns that the more pop influenced sound alienates the core fan base and lacks that creative spark of their previous work. So I looked at Reddit because I was curious what fans were saying. And one Reddit user commented, I believe after the act, there was once a comment in an interview that Mike's lyrics are essentially too cryptic and people weren't connecting the way they would if the lyrics were straightforward. So it was a band choice. It's why Mike wasn't the main writer on Color Decay 2. So the thought that maybe there's a shift because and then the lyrics maybe aren't quite as deep, they're a little bit more on the nose, because the band was maybe criticized for that and they're trying to connect in a different way. This has not been confirmed by the band or anything, but this is kind of the fan theory. And that is a pretty good review of what Reddit is saying and what a lot of fans were saying in that space. So looking at one of the lyrics of Ritual, end of the rope, sever the ties, another day, the same disguise. It's like we lived it all before. How do you hope when everyone lies? No one looks me in the eyes. Shut me out, close the door. So we scream the word, spell it out, keep doing the same. Sing the song, spread the word, keep doing the same. Fall in line, keep spinning like a figure eight. I said I don't need you to save me. I'll be what you make me. Let you lead me on like repetition. Fill my head with bad decisions. What if everything we want is everything that keeps us lost and miserable? Let's live for the ritual. Drown ourselves in the routine, comfort and conformity. Know your future, give up your dreams. So we scream the word, spell it out, keep doing the same. Sing the song, spread the word, keep doing the same. Fall in line, keep spinning like a figure eight. I said, I don't need you to save me. I'll be what you make me. Let you lead me on and on like repetition. Fill my head with bad decisions. What if everything we want is everything that keeps us lost and miserable? Let's live for the ritual. We're so lost and miserable. Let's live for the ritual. Know your future. Give up your dreams. No, pick it up, pick it up, pick it up to know your future. Give up your dreams to know your future. Give up your dreams. I don't need you to, don't need you to save me. I'll be what you make me. Let you lead me on and on like repetition. Fill my head with bad decisions. What if everything we want is everything that keeps us lost and miserable? Let's live for the ritual. We're so lost and miserable. Let's live for the ritual. So the Devil Wears Prada has been a great example of transformation while still maintaining a core line of identity that they started and became a band with. They started in the Myspace metalcore era. Then they were able to adjust and grow into one of the more consistent, emotionally complex, and creatively fearless bands within this scene. And they were able to, again, stay true to who they are while still maintaining relevance and also opening space for new fans and experimentation. And that is really special. So I personally look forward to seeing them live and experiencing that, getting a feel for their fans on the cruise and that world a little bit more. And if you are new to the Devil Wears Prada and you've kind of just written them off, maybe you're also like me and you don't lean as much towards that like scream heavy world, give them a try. Listen to some of the albums throughout time see what you think. Don't start with flowers. It is a lot different than some of the other stuff. So kind of go through that history and go in with an open mind. Maybe you'll connect and find a new band that you'll love and then be able to be in the perfect time to continue to experience their evolution. So that is your homework. And then next week, we will dive into August Burns Red. So I will see you in our next class.